Welcome to Engaging Aging with Erin and Lauren.
Join us as we share laughter, tears, and demystify the realities and silver linings that occur later in life.
So, Tom and Craig, welcome to the studio. It's been a long time for us to get here, and we are just so excited to launch into the conversation around financial planning. As you know, Erin and I specialize in working with older adults and helping them plan for their futures. And not only does that bring in the emotional and the physical aspects, but certainly the financial aspects. And I think one of the biggest things for our clients and for us is realizing that they've spent so much time of their lives increasing their wealth. Then they decide to retire. And then they're looking at, oh my, now my wealth is going to potentially start to decrease because of fixed incomes and increasing healthcare costs, and it can become incredibly overwhelming for them. So I'm just excited to have you here today because I think that understanding that financial planning is so important. If you find the right professional, it also doesn't have to be overwhelming or daunting.
Correct.
So many of us don't want to talk about our financial situations.
Not at all.
And especially with our families or anybody that may be doing better or different than us. I like to say for all of our listeners out there, we're all different. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have very different financial situations. But the good news is, and hopefully you can validate this for us today, there are solutions for everyone out there. Would you say that that is correct?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. And it's a great point that you brought up at the start there. You know, it's something that Craig and I talk to everyone about, which is that whole concept of, let's call it the taboo around money, right? That we've never been comfortable talking about money. And so as we get older, and now it becomes more of this conversation, like even amongst family members, we're not having that conversation. So there isn't that, say, let's call it intergenerational layering or understanding of that, because we end up in this, well, I've always done it myself, right?
One of the big problems is, you can go to college with a degree in lots of different things, but you don't usually get a degree in personal finance, right? I mean, I have an accounting degree, I have a financial background, and no courses that were around personal planning. I mean, you get a home ec. You're saying balance a checkbook.
Right.
So where are people getting their financial knowledge from? Well, they watch their parents or they talk to their friends. They're not working with professionals, they're not getting the education they need. And that's why a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they're afraid I've made a mistake or I'm going to look silly. I don't know what I'm talking about. And so they just stumble along and try to do what everyone else tells them they should do.
Or I see too often working with clients where they had a really poor experience with a financial advisor, and now they're not doing any of that, and their money is still between the mattress or somewhere else. And so they can't then comprehend or wrap their arms around bringing in another professional. It's a very vulnerable moment to say, here's where I'm at in my life.
Right. Yeah, and I think just like, any professional, you have some that really work well, and some that don't. And there's a different fit, and like you mentioned earlier, it's about finding a financial professional that you are comfortable with, that you can trust their advice, that you feel good, when they talk to them, they make you feel better about your situation. And that doesn't mean you want a yes man or a yes woman. You want somebody who's going to be honest with you as well. Because lots of clients, maybe they are doing some missteps and they need some redirection in their budgeting or their priorities or those types of things. So our job isn't to, as an advisor, your job isn't to tell people what to do, is to give them options so they can get themselves to a better place. Like I said, a lot of advisors out there are transactional. They're money motivated.
That's where the problem comes in, is because you end up in those situations where somebody feels like, oh wait, I got taken advantage of, or this really wasn't in my best interest as they did whatever they did, or suggestions that happened. And we do get that a lot. And so a lot of times we will ask people, what was your prior experience? How did it feel? What can we do that's a little bit different from what you had dealt with or had been experiencing prior, because you just want to make sure that they're able to have that conversation, voice that, like, I've got a concern,
Right.
or this was an issue for me, or had this happened to me in the past. So you just want to be able to say, okay, well, make sure we address that as we're having this conversation. Because for us, that's what it's all about. It's a conversation. We just want to know what's going on and what is a concern for you.
Yeah, we
Well,
had a
and
client.
understanding that the conversation is two-sided, right? The older adult or their family member is interviewing you just as much as you're vetting them out to make sure that you are the appropriate professional to support them. What would be maybe two pieces of advice that you would give to someone that's listening to the podcast today if they're thinking about making a change with their financial planner and interviewing someone else in terms of finding that right fit?
Well, I'll give you this. I tell everybody that we sit down with, because the first thing I'm going to tell you is to look the person up on what is known as BrokerCheck. You can just Google it. If you Google BrokerCheck, it'll come up. It's FINRA.org. That's the regulatory agency for us. That's going to show, it's going to give you the person, and it's going to tell you how long they've been doing it. It's going to tell you how they're licensed. And then most importantly, it's going to tell you, have there been any financial improprieties, any filings against, any customer complaints, anything like that. BrokerCheck will uncover and have all of that. So you can literally see the person and understand who they are and what they do.
Okay.
Because there's different levels in terms of everybody, in our industry and what they're able to do.
What about,
I would say the second tip I would bring up is, like you were saying, sometimes people get a little older, they want other people involved in those decisions, not just themselves. And I always say, the advisor should be an open platform. So if they want to bring their attorney, they want to bring in their accountant, they want to bring in their kids, have the conversation, all your advice should be so open that anybody can hear what you're telling them and debate or dispute or, talk about what's the right way to go forward. Because it's not if someone's trying to do something in a little bit of a veil, then you should be a little bit red flag up.
Yes. How do you feel as though someone can sit in front of a financial planner and understand if they have a transactional approach or a conservative approach, that they're going to be the right person? Not everybody is about one particular way of financial planning versus another.
Right. Well, so I think that will come fairly quickly as you have conversations. You'll get either it's really all about you and your concerns, your goals, which we're trying to get to. And it's not so much about, hey, here's a strategy for you, or here's an option, or, oh, you have that thing, let me show you this thing, that type of approach. That's really where, as Craig mentioned, that a lot of times what happens is you have people who are like, well, we can do better than that, or whatever you have, instead of thinking like, well, why did you get into it? What is it that can be changed about it that can maybe continue to be good for you if you're having issues or concerns about it. But I think that's what's going to come from it, is you're going to have that conversation about what it is you're looking to do, what your concerns are.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing as Tom. I would say, who's doing most of the talking? Is it you or is it the advisor? Right? If the advisor is doing most of the talking, that means you can't listen and talk at the same time. At least I can't.
Right.
Are they listening to what you're saying? Are they communicating with you in a way that you feel comfortable, back? Because sometimes advisors will talk in our vernacular and you're just lost. I'm going to mention an annuity. Okay, I don't even know what that is.
Dumb it down for me, please.
Exactly, right, exactly. Even for us, right? Yeah. So it's really, it doesn't matter how smart the advisor is. It only matters what they can convey and relate to the client, and making sure they're giving them the right advice and they feel comfortable in the advice that they're getting. And like Tom said earlier, if the first thing you're talking about is transaction in the first meeting, usually they're transaction driven. So
that's a great point. Thank you. So at the beginning of this, I talked about accumulation versus later in life distributions and kind of spending down sort of on your wealth, right? Is it ever too late to start the financial planning process? Because as I mentioned, people are coming to this at vastly different points in their life.
Right. Right. So the answer there is no. It's never too late to start. I will tell you that part of the issue is our industry is terrible. They suck at telling people about retirement is what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
Retirement is all about cash flow. Cash flow equals certainty. Certainty takes the pressure off of money. For those in the listening audience, if you remember nothing else about what we've talked today, just take that away from it. Retirement is all about cash flow, right? So cash flow is just depending on where you are, what you're trying to achieve. And it doesn't matter if we're 55 or 65 or 70, like you've got a cash need. How are you solving for that? Then you have the rest of it that goes into it.
The other issue you have to longevity need.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, used to be, when talking about Social Security came back in the 30s, people retired at 65 and they died at 68. I mean, they weren't living that long. Social Security could work for them. But now people are retiring early. I mean, people are retiring, early 60s, late 50s now. And they may spend 30 or 40 years in retirement. Now, the issue is, once again, now I've accumulated these assets. How do I make them last in cash flow for the rest of my life so I have more money than life? And then, as you've pointed out earlier, as you get older, sometimes it costs more money to stay alive.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, the amount of what it costs for your care needs these days. It's interesting. We just came from a community where, on average, people are spending anywhere between $15,000 and $20,000 a month. Now, that's a high-end community with a lot of amenities, right? But even for the very affluent person looking at something like that, or a community that's anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000, it's still a lot when you're considering. I've been living in my longtime home for 50 plus years. I know what my expenses are. Now things are starting to shift for me. I think the magic here is we'd never want aging to be a doom and gloom.
Right.
We always want you to understand, yes, this is part of the process. This is part of life. We need to plan for it. We don't need to be scared by it. And certainly there are different options out there, but how does your money work for you as long as possible? And one thing that we practice, and really is our secret sauce, is the sell later approach for people as well, because the physical aspects, the emotional aspects, and the logistical aspects of making that major life transition is incredibly overwhelming. There's a lot of factors to take into consideration, and we don't have a crystal ball to understand what's going to happen in the short term and the long term. So, how do you, from a financial planning perspective, really understand what someone wants for their later chapters of their years, and how to effectively plan for that so that you are taking some of that burden off of their shoulders, knowing it's okay to make these transitions?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of times we'll have conversations with clients just about that exact thing. What do you see? What's the vision that you have for it? And a lot of times, most people, while they've thought of it, they haven't really envisioned it, right? They haven't really seen it. And so Greg and I will always talk to people about doing practice runs, doing trial. You think you want to go to Florida? Well, go live in Florida, but don't vacation in Florida. Just go live.
Interesting. Okay.
Just go live in for a week. Like you're there every day. Like, where are you going to get a cup of coffee from? Where are you going to get, an ice cream cone? That type of thing. Like just say, okay, this really wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so that becomes part of that conversation. Like you had this whole idea that you were always going to do that. And then the reality is, I don't really want to live here 24/7 for the rest of my life, ultimately. So there is some process to that of, hey, we got, what's the reality here? I think the other is like people with the RVs and going out on the road type of thing. That's another one. Like, how much time have you really spent with the two of you, this little tiny world? And are you really going to be able to, coexist like 24/7 in that world if you're doing it? So I think sometimes there's the, I don't know what you want to call it, like the ultimate goal, my retirement, this is what I envision, but the reality is more it's a day-to-day thing, and how are you going to make that happen?
Yeah, I think the other thing you got to take into consideration is, especially when you're dealing with a couple, a husband and wife, or partners, whatever, is that one may have one outlook, another may have another. Right. So how do you meld those two outlooks together? And one of the things is it's really great to talk about you're going on the biggest vacation you're ever going to take because you're done working, right? And so you're going to do things, you're going to spend money and all that kind of stuff. But I think the bigger thing we try to alleviate, that is, what is the biggest fear? Is the biggest fear running out of money? Is it if I need care, who's going to take care of me? What is their biggest fear? And you want to try to tackle that biggest fear to make sure that they feel comfortable going into retirement, knowing the biggest fear has been dealt with, and then come up with contingencies to deal with the other things.
It is another one. It's very funny that he mentioned that. See, our industry has always told people that the number one fear for retirees or people going into retirement is that running out of money. It's not having enough money for the rest of their life.
Yes.
And that is not fear. Yours is more the top fear, as you were sort of talking about. It's actually dementia. It's Alzheimer's. It's the worry about having some sort of cognitive impairment. And the second fear is then having to pay for it, right? Those are the two top fears for most retirees today. That's where the top concern is. That whole worry about cognitive impairment paying for that care. Because as you mentioned, some of those communities, which are terrific, but they're 10, 15,000 a month for that kind of care.
Well, on the other hand, you could look at home care, right? That could be upwards of that amount of money too, depending on how much, hands-on assistance you need in your home, or is it just basic?
So real quick, just a slight plug for everybody. If you ever get a chance, go to our YouTube channel at Aries Foundation. You will see us. We had the wonderful ladies from Dovetail on doing a whole presentation about should I stay or should I go?
Yes.
And do I age in place or do I not age in place?
Which is really important because I don't think that everybody looks at it from a holistic standpoint to say, what is going to be the best thing for me? Let's face it, most people that we meet with have planned to live and stay in their homes until they're going out that front door 2 feet first, right? But not all scenarios in life allow us to do that. And so we do have to effectively kind of plan for it.
Like I always say, our job as financial advisors isn't to make people wealthy or to make sure they have enough money for everything. But it really is about making sure when you get to certain points in your life, you have choices. And that's the biggest, saddest thing I see when people come to us and say, my mother is sick and here's the financial situation and we didn't do any planning and now we have no choice, right? And so, while Medicare is there as a background, it shouldn't be your main plan, right? Because then you don't have a choice of facilities or your care or any of those types of things. And I think that's the biggest thing when people get older, especially because as people age, you inherently get more nervous, more anxious about things. They lose control over certain faculties, and then it just becomes a more nerve-wracking experience. So to have the choice to be able to stay home, like you just talked about, care at home, or if you have to go to a facility, being able to choose that facility, who your caregiver is going to be. And at the same time, letting the kids, worry about the purse, not be the nurse, right, is also important as well. So it's really, the planning is important because you want to make sure, regardless of whether you actually ever go into a facility or not, because I know it'll never happen to me, right? If they do have to go in, I have a choice in who's giving me care and where it's going to be.
So Craig, you brought up a very interesting scenario, and I have seen it a couple of times being in this field supporting older adults, is where you have a couple and they have very different opinions on what life is, how to invest, how to manage their money. You're a financial planner. I'm sure you also wear the hat of a therapist in many situations too. There are so many people that are navigating this and they have a fear of bringing that up because they've been a couple together for so long, right? But things are changing. Or you have a scenario where the husband managed all of the investments. Things are declining for him very rapidly. The wife has never really been involved, and now she is tasked with being involved. How do you manage that for someone, one, to be comfortable, and two, I guess my other question is, how often should someone be meeting with their financial planner as these shifts and things kind of take place?
Well, I think first, the first thing is that we always, and you try to do it as much as you can, is have both spouses together, whether we're on Zoom, whether we're in the office, wherever it is, that we have both parties together. Because as Craig said, sometimes these can be, and they can be conversations, even for those who are later in life, that they've never really voiced. So they're voicing it to us. like the first time, like it is a therapy session because that's what happens.
I mean, it's the reality, right?
Right, and they'll be like, "Well, wait, and like we said, that sometimes it's that whole taboo about talking about money. It becomes that, like, well, okay, we've got somebody here now. I can tell you this is what I want to see happen, like that type of thing. Or, as you said, there are a lot of those situations, and Craig and I have dealt with them on many, many different occasions, where one person, one spouse handled everything and the other spouse was sort of okay, that's their area. How many times we get that? Oh yeah, no, my husband deals with it, my wife deals with it, just talk to her. And I'm like, well, that's great, but what if she's not capable anymore?
You need to understand it.
You're right. You've got to have a handle on how all this stuff flows. And that's one of the biggest things for us in terms of dealing with couples is trying to get them both there on the page.
Yeah, I think there's always, whenever someone's reaching out to financial advice, there's always one initiator. It's the husband or the wife. And usually it's because they have a fear, right? We're going to be transitioning, or buying a new home, or we're having a child, or we're retiring, or whatever the next phase is. And so they may have had some conversations with a significant other, but maybe not in depth. And as Tom pointed out, most couples don't talk about this stuff on a regular basis. Go on date night and Friday night and start talking about, so what are we going to do when we retire, right?
Right.
So the nice part of having a good advisor, like I said, the important thing is, are they listening? Listening is key. And you got to listen to both parties. What do you feel and what do you feel? And with a judgment-free zone, because you're not there to judge what they want. You're there to try to can you meld what they're doing together and alleviate each person's fears. Now, one person may be, I'm really nervous about running out of money, right? The other person may be, well, I'm really worried about being bored or not having having things in retirement, or I want to travel. Well, I want to make sure their home is safe. So there's things you got to. So how do you compromise their values, so that they both have a positive outcome? And as to how frequent, I think at least once a year you want to be reevaluating, just seeing where you are. But a good advisor would allow you to contact them at any time you have a question.
That's great. So let's get into the family dynamics part of this conversation, because this is real too, and I think a lot of our clients are navigating this as well. They have put so much of their investments into working for them later in life. Their number one goal is to pass that money along to their adult children or to their heirs. What is your biggest piece of advice for someone when they're sort of thinking about everything, but also they have increased care needs?
Right. So again, it goes back to the whole retirement conversation, and where haven't really been very good at explaining how retirement works to everybody. So the number one goal of money in retirement is income, right? So that's the first thing it's there for. Then it's also there for liquidity. And then if somebody wants to, legacy. And as you pointed out, the conversations that Craig and I wind up with where it's like legacy is trying to become this most important thing.
Right.
But income and liquidity are more important. Yes, you want to have that legacy, and we understand the concept of it, but you've really got to be thinking of this as, all right, I've got to have my income solved. I got to have liquidity for when stuff happens, because stuff is going to happen. Then I can have whatever's left can go, right? Or I've got to plan for that money to be there. Those are two different avenues of how we're moving. And like you said, for us, we've always sort of dealt with it, but nowadays, and certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, the focus has been, well, wait, I've got to be planning for care needs as well, right? So this becomes an added, we're bucket guys. Everything is bucket.
Right,
So you got three different, so now it's four buckets that I'm dealing with. I got to have my income bucket. I got to have a liquidity bucket. I got to have a bucket that's going to pay for care. And then, oh, by the way, I want to leave money to the kids or whoever. And charities, whatever it is.
And actually, there's some really cool stuff today, hybrid products that never existed before, that'll allow you to kind of take care of both. Because not to put a plug in for life insurance, but life insurance is a great way to try to move an estate, because the money goes to your inheritance to your children tax free, right? And also, so it's a great way to transfer wealth, and then you can use all your other assets because you know what's going to be passing in life insurance. Now, there's also life insurance hybrids who incorporate long-term care in with life insurance. So as Tom points out, if you have a care issue, well, the money's there for your care. If you don't need it for the care, well, it transfers to the children as a legacy, Right. So it's no longer it's use it or lose it type scenario. Someone's getting the benefit no matter what. And so it's really about, can you do that? Can you do the foresight and foresight planning to make sure you can put those types of things in place?
Yeah, it's interesting because, as Craig said, one of the things for us that we really do, try to talk to, especially older, right? Because as we get older, like you said, there's all that concern, and I don't. It's almost like I don't want to spend my money.
Right.
This money's for the next
Right.
generation. I can't spend it, right? So it is that way to say, no, 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 no. You now have permission to spend your money that you saved for your entire life for this purpose because you designated this chunk of money is going to be there for your heirs when you pass. That's the idea and the concept of it, because that's what happens. We get that a lot with people like, well, no, I don't want to spend it. I'm going to leave that to the kids, or you probably get it with the houses. Like,
Right.
we're going to leave the house for it, but we need the house to move to the next place to use that as in, and go along. So it is difficult, and designated specifically how you're going to do, and that's what all planning gets into.
Mm-hmm.
As Craig said, what's important for you?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to have? What's the most important thing for you? And if it's legacy planning, well, then we've got to set it up and make sure, because you definitely need income in retirement, and you better have money set aside for that other stuff that's going to come up, because the car's going to break down, the pet's going to get
Right.
sick, something's going to
Right.
happen.
Yeah, this is a tip and trick for the wealthy that they don't want everybody else to know. I mean, most wealth is intergenerational, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
transferring from one generation to another. And if you don't think the wealthy are leveraging life insurance to pass huge sums of money to the next generation, you're crazy. They do, because it's leverage. And that's what people don't realize is, oh, they think it's no, it's about transferring wealth from one generation to the next. So use the tips and tricks of the wealthy if you want to
Is
get.
that something that you can only set up at a certain point in your life? Like, is there a particular age or something that's happening with you physically or cognitively that you would not be able to tap into something like that?
Well, it's a
Right,
little bit like,
right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, no, no. One of the issues there, and as Craig said, if you think of this from a aspect of a tool or a strategy, that you have to qualify for it,
Okay.
right? So if we get to a situation that, yeah, the person is, not healthy or has cognitive decline, more than likely they're not going to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of times these conversations are better served when we're in our, 50s, 60s, if we're talking about, I'm trying to do legacy planning, than when we're in our 70s, because who knows what, it's all based on age and health at that point.
Yeah, I've actually had clients. This one client in particular, he had quite a bit of real estate. He was probably worth a little over $8 million, and we didn't have a lot of cash on hand. Wanted his kids to get the legacy of the property and all that. And I talked to him about the fact I think he was in his late 60s at the time, and we talked about, you might want to put long-term care in place for yourself that would protect your other assets, so you don't have to liquidate anything, that type of thing. He goes, no, 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 I'm good with that. Okay, fine. Years go by, he calls me back. Craig, can you come over to the house? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Come out, we have lunch. He starts talking about that long-term care stuff you talked about. Yeah, I really like to get that now. Oh, fantastic. So tell me what's going on with you. Yeah, I just got diagnosed with early Alzheimer's.
Wow.
I said, I'm sorry, but I can't help you now. It was a very sad moment. He said, I don't care what it costs. I'll pay whatever it is.
That's
It's
not the case. You
it,
can't just pay
Right.
for it.
you,
Yeah.
you crashed the car. I can't
Right.
insure it now. Right.
Right.
So it's really important to try. If these are things on your mind, get ahead of it. Don't take the ostrich and sand approach.
Mm.
Really face it and get ahead of it.
I think sometimes as professionals, it's hard because you're trying to think about what could potentially be happening, and not
Mm-hmm.
all of our clients are so forthcoming with what is happening in a personal situation for you to be able to step in and say, okay, maybe things are changing for you before it gets to that point
Mm-hmm.
to get things in place for them. So
Well,
really it's more of advocate for yourself. It's a vulnerable moment to share what's happening in your life, but it's so important in the grand scheme of things when you're thinking about your planning process that you are sharing information on a yearly, if not more frequent basis with your
right, or
professionals.
as stuff comes up. Yeah, no, and that's it's particularly true when we're looking at an age difference with
Mm-hmm.
spouses. Like, when we're talking about some 8, 10 year, age difference, that younger spouse more than likely is going to be on their own for a much longer period of time. And depending on the kids and dealing with it, a lot of times everybody's like, well, my kids are just going to take care of me. And it's like, well, have you told them that? Have you had that
Right.
conversation with them? Because that happens. And so a lot of times it's not so much about, hey, we're going to try to do something for the older spouse, because more than likely the younger spouse will be around to help, take care of, do those type of things. It's the younger spouse that's more than likely going to be on, could possibly be on their own for like a 20-year time period. And who's helping them out in that situation?
Yeah.
And that's really where you got to start thinking about it.
Yeah, but even in a situation where you are married, you say, well, I'll take care of my spouse, will take care of me. You're 75 years old trying to take care of somebody, a few years older than you, trying to lift them, trying to care for them. It's the caregiver that all of a sudden their health deteriorates rapidly. And sometimes they don't outlive the person they're caring for because their health deteriorates. So these are really things that you want to, while you're young enough to think about it, while you're young enough to have some options before you get into that position, think about and have conversations about.
It's interesting that you bring up like an age gap difference, right? We were just having this conversation. My aunt married a significantly older man, and he always managed all of the finances, and he loved to buy and sell stocks all the time and watch it and do those things on his own. And he had a financial advisor that helped, so they had sort of like a hybrid relationship, if you will. And he loved doing that, but he got very sick very quickly. She was tasked with taking care of him. Throughout no part of that process did she have time to sit down with him and say, what is it that you've been doing from a financial perspective? What do I need to know? She just went right into the caregiver role, and then he passed. And then it's really like you're going through the grieving process, and none of life stops in terms of what you have to pay for or plan for. And so it hits you really hard. Unfortunately, she didn't have that education behind that. And I don't think equally she had the right professional helping her really understand that, because the lifestyle she wanted to live was a little bit different than what he was living. And, just sort of that knowledge base. So it's never really too late either to evaluate, are you working with the right professional for yourself? What is sort of your thing? And also finding the right person that can put it into layman's terms for you if you're not very educated in that.
The other thing I think you want to take into consideration, especially in today's world, is a lot of times, finances seem like a man's thing.
Yes.
Just like math.
Yes.
Right. And women just aren't up to the challenge. However, women are the ones that survive the men most of the time. And they're the ones who's stuck with having to deal with this kind of stuff. So you really want an advisor who's going to value the women's input, see them as an equal in the relationship, and make sure they understand and can deal with these issues, even if it's just with your guidance, the advice guidance. But don't belittle their understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing in your aunt's situation, because that comes up, we talked about it, where one spouse handles everything, the other spouse doesn't handle it. One of the things we talk to family about for this purpose is the idea of having some sort of a place, a book, or what I call the family big book, but it's where everything is. So all those accounts, passwords, all those contacts, everybody there. So if something does happen, I know where to go. In my house, it's a weird thing. Like I handle half the stuff, my wife handles the other half, right? So it's like she's always saying, like, you got to tell me, like, I wouldn't have any idea how to get this thing, that thing, or what's happening. I'm like, okay, I'm putting it together for you. Here's where it is. It's all laid out for you. And it's one of the things that Craig and I are putting together. It's our thing for this year that we're going to have, so that all of our companies can do that same thing with their stuff, because we think it's very, very important. Because even if it's, all right, we're both still here, both still cognizant, both still involved, something could happen to both of us. Then it's going to fall on to the next generation to have to pick up those pieces. And we've both seen that situation occur where we're finding stuff a year, 2 years later. Like, wait, there was this account. Wait, what is this? Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute, now what do we do? So it's very important get all of that together, but that brings that back to the whole, we're having a conversation about money and how do we have this so that everybody understands the one spouse can still handle everything. They just got to make it so that, listen, if something ever happened, here's where you go, or here's who you
Right.
call, or here's
Right.
the contact or the passwords, or whatever the case may be.
This has been such a good conversation. And I just want to say, I think throughout the last half hour of our discussion, brought up the word fear a few times, right? Because there's so much fear around what's happening, our money depleting quicker than, we pass away. How can we normalize the conversations around money? Having them, being open to it. Do you have one piece of advice to make it feel a little bit less overwhelming?
I don't know if I have a piece of advice for it.
I think I might have a motivator. I
I
don't know
like
if you
that.
call it a
There
piece
we
of
go.
advice.
There we go.
The motivator would be as we all naturally get a little bit older, we see things happen to some of our family, our friends, people we know at work. And then we start telling the story like we're telling today about this person and XYZ happened to.
Right.
The motivator I would say is don't be the story.
I love that.
Don't be the story. Don't be the one people are talking about. They didn't take care of the life insurance. They didn't know what to do about their care. They didn't, something happened to the spouse and they had no idea what to do. So if any type of motivator to talk about these things is there, that you don't want to be that person.
I love that so much.
The other thing I would say is I guess for it is to you talk about fear, but more of that. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Somebody will always say to us, this is probably sounds like a dumb question, and our thing is like, no, there is never a dumb question when it comes to your money. You should know exactly what's happening. You should be aware of what your money is, where it is, what it's doing. And if you don't, the second piece. The first one I told you about was cash flow. The second one to take from this is that ask the question. Reach out, ask somebody, what is this doing? Why is it there? What does this mean for me? And what else could I might do instead? Right? So sort of take that proactive approach with it. Like, don't think, like you said, like, okay, it's there, it's doing its thing. No, have an understanding of what that means. You don't have to get technical. It doesn't have to get deep into the jargon, but you can just get a general sense of, oh, now a lot of times you know, they come back every year. Like I said, we meet with them and they ask the same questions. And they're going to be like, I think this, I just want to make sure. And we're like, no, 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 that's okay. We're going to bring you all the way back to the beginning, why we started this conversation, what we did, and why we did it, until you get this right, in terms of going through it. And they're like, oh, yeah, now I remember, I get it, that type of thing. But that's sort of with us, what we sort of put into them, like, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Well, and I think that's the magic piece or the communication on the other side of fear, right? Like, yes, your money's going to deplete in retirement and with the care that you may need. However, if you're doing this right, you're hopefully making some money too along the way. So that ideally is the importance of
Or that you plan for
planning
it, right?
as well.
Well, fear is usually a result of the unknown.
Correct.
And if you can make the unknown known, then sometimes the fear just alleviates itself.
And I always just say, be curious, right? So to your point, ask the questions, be curious. And I want to give both of you a selfish plug and a moment of gratitude because there's not a lot of professionals out there that Erin and I can call and say, here's our client situation. They really just 30-minute conversation to either validate what's happening, know that there is a solution in place for them because they do have that fear that they're not properly planned or they've properly planned, but something has shifted drastically. And so thank you just for taking that time to answer those questions and just being out there providing this education. It's so important because really we can change the narrative around talking about money and planning for the future. It does not have to be doom and gloom.
It does not, and we
thank
should.
you for all of that.
Oh, absolutely, and we
Yeah.
appreciate the kind words and kind thoughts. Absolutely. I mean, for anybody out there, I mean, that's kind of what we try to do. Our conversations are all meant to be that way. They're meant to be more casual, more relatable, more down to earth, if you will, in terms of try to take all of that terminology and jargon out of the conversation.
And dumb it down.
Maybe on my end, not on his end. Maybe on my end.
I love it. No, it's always great talking to you. How do our listeners, we're going to include this in the show notes, how do our listeners contact you, get more education, kind of give your contact information?
Absolutely. So it is the Aries Foundation for Financial Education. You can find us on the web. It's www.ariesfoundation.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can check us out. On there is contact information. There's our YouTube channel, which has all the content on it. But also our email is info@ariesfoundation.org, and we're always happy to answer any questions or contact from, hey, I've got a situation or whatever will come up.
And hopefully we can find a way to link our show that we did with you guys about should I stay or should I go, so that if you want some more information on really kind of thinking about that for yourself, you can certainly, we'll include that in the show notes as well. Craig and Tom, thank you for being here with us today. Really appreciate it. This is the first of many conversations.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.